in the Kingdom Builders Roofing Studio. Stephen?
All right, thank you, John. And joining us now is Alex Smith. Very excited to chat with her. Alex is a former chairwoman of the College Republican National Committee, also the first female elected chair in the organization's 125-year history. Alex, welcome to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
So, good news. The government's up and running. We have a government again. I don't know if that's good or bad, Alex.
Yeah, that remains to be seen. I think that the last 3 days, or really the weekend that they shut the government down, were just completely pointless from what we saw yesterday. Essentially, Schumer and the Senate Democrats agreed to what was substantively the same deal that Republicans were offering on Friday night.
Yep.
So they've wasted a lot of the taxpayers' time and money on this pointless political stunt.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of that then, because what you just said is quite true. They just simply gave up and they said, okay, fine, we'll give you what you asked for before we chose to shut the government down. First question is, what were the Republicans wanting that the Democrats have caved and given?
Well, so Republicans actually put a lot into the government funding bill. For example, they included 6 years of CHIP funding. That's health insurance for millions of kids across the country. And their plan would have kept the government going into February. I think what Republicans wanted to do was to then have talks about immigration after or concurrently with while keeping the government open. Because, of course, DACA, the immigration program sort of at stake in all of this, doesn't expire until the beginning of March.
Right.
So I think from the Republican standpoint, there was plenty of time to get done both, and there was a way to keep our government open, to keep our military, paid, and then also to extend the CHIP program, which is very, very important to millions of Americans. And so what Democrats were demanding in turn is they were demanding what was known as a clean DACA bill. So they just wanted what they were looking for was just a complete solution on the DACA folks attached to the government funding bill, but which was sort of the position of the hardline progressives and left.
Right. The CHIP, in case the listeners don't know what the CHIP program is, I know we've talked at length about DACA on this program before. The CHIP program, I don't think we've ever even chatted about it here. CHIP stands for Children's Health Insurance Program. It's actually part of Medicaid, and about 9 million children in America are enrolled in it. So it's something that kids rely on. The whole DACA stuff, Alex, to me is interesting because there's very little time now. We're almost through January, and I can't believe I even just said that, but we're almost through January, and like you said, the DACA memorandum, executive order, whatever you want to call it, it expires March 1st. So there is 1 month essentially that the Democrats and the Republicans have to get together to decide if they can come to an agreement on what to do with these what's called dreamers or young people who are here illegally. Do you predict something's going to get done?
Well, look, I think that what President Trump and the Republicans have indicated is that something must get done. And I think that, it's commendable that President Trump really put this in Congress's hands.
Yes.
Because, when you're talking about these dreamers, their fate is pretty uncertain if it's only decided by executive action. That was a favorite of President Obama,
Right.
to sort of use executive orders. What President Trump was actually saying in this is, hey, Congress, you need to come up with a permanent solution for these kids who are in this country through no fault of their own. They were brought here by their parents. And the United States is the only country they've ever known growing up. And I think what President Trump, he used an important word in all of this, which is empathy, that we need to show compassion for these people. What President Trump, though, wanted in return, and I don't think it's unreasonable, and I think that a lot of Americans, while supporting DACA, don't think this is unreasonable, was tighter border security, because you want to prevent an ongoing problem. You
Yes.
don't want to create a situation where we provide some kind of legalization for these 700,000
And then leave the
DACA
door
recipients.
wide open.
Yeah, and then encourage more, the same kind of pattern from coming in. And so I think what, President Trump was doing was striking a common sense balance. I think what the Democrats have done in terms of our ability to get this done by March is really throw a wrench into the negotiations by throwing such a tantrum over it and tying it to the government shutdown. But I think that, President Trump and the Republicans aren't going to let these kids down.
Well, a first rule of injury, no matter where you're at or what you're doing. I'm a military guy, and I remember learning this in the military, and everybody else learns it, just common sense. First rule of injury is stop the bleeding. If somebody's wounded and they're bleeding, you can't treat the wound until the bleeding stops. And I think what President Trump is asking is very reasonable, Alex. I don't think that if you were to poll regular Americans, I think what you're going to find is if you told them, hey, there's somebody here who is here illegally, but they've never lived anywhere else. Their parents brought them here as little kids. They only know English. They don't know any other culture, any other nation. Should we send them back to Honduras or El Salvador? Now, some will say yes, but I think overwhelming majority might say no, let them keep them here. But that doesn't mean that we should leave the doors open because, Alex, can you imagine how many people would come flooding into the United States if we legalized a bunch of illegal people and then, boom, a whole bunch more decide I'm coming in because I can get that years later? I mean, you're just asking for it.
I think that Senator Marco Rubio, he always speaks eloquently on this issue, and he says Americans are the most generous people in the world. This is the most welcoming country of immigrants. That's been a part of our heritage here as a country, and of course, we adhere to the Western sort of legal philosophy that we don't punish children for the sins of their parents. So I think that, and when you look at the polls on this issue, DACA is favored by a vast majority of Americans, which is, granting these kids some sort of reprieve from deportation. But the other thing that also polls extremely well with Americans is tightened border security, because that's a common sense issue. We're a country. We need a border. The border needs to be enforced, or we're not a country at all.
Exactly.
And I just think that the left, they so underestimate why that's important to Americans out there. I mean, I think maybe in sort of their elite circles, it's something that's not as important, or it's something that's sort of disregarded. But I think that's just such a common sense issue, which is why I think ultimately they did not prevail in the stunt that they pulled over the government shutdown, because they started to look at the opinion polls and they said, Americans stopped and said, wait a second, why are Democrats holding this up? They're holding this up over an immigration program that, first of all, we still have some time to deal with. But they're also holding it up because, they didn't like the border security options that President Trump and the Republicans wanted with the original DACA compromise that was offered. They said, no way.
No way. Let's do this. Let's do a hypothetical. Okay, I want to get your thoughts on my compromise. This is what we'll call the Soloman compromise here. Okay.
We're splitting the baby.
We're splitting the baby. That's right. Yeah. She knows her history. She knows her Old Testament. All right. My compromise is this, because now I want to get into like the nitty gritty political part of it. Obviously, legalizing millions of people who are here illegally especially Latinos, it's going to increase huge amounts of Democrat voters. This is an obvious thing. So, what about this compromise here? Because it's not American taxpayers' fault if somebody's parents brought them here illegally. An American who is a citizen here shouldn't be punished and have to take up the slack and suffer voting ramifications because of what illegals did. So, my thought is this. What if we do provide not a pathway to citizenship, but a pathway to legality, legal residency, but we say you cannot have citizenship or voting rights if you're a part of this program. That way it doesn't sway voter rolls. What do you think of that compromise?
Well, so actually I think that, and I as you mentioned, my former career here used to be working with young people, and so I did a lot with looking at the way younger people thought, particularly young women and young minorities, and in doing so, you find that so much of the Latino culture, Hispanic culture, is conservative. These are people who very often share conservative values. And I think that what people were waking up to in 2016, because, I mean, keep in mind that President Trump actually got a higher share of the Hispanic vote than people were sort of anticipating.
Right.
I think what's important to keep in mind is that for years, the Democrats have been all talk, no action for many of the groups that they purport to represent. And I think that President Trump, as sort of a change maker, as the ultimate deal maker, and someone who's really not like that partisan, could come in.
He always wants a good deal.
Could come in, take some real action on this, and show a whole generation of Hispanics that the Republican Party has something actually to offer them. We have action, not just words. So I would actually argue that by the president speaking so strongly on this issue and seeking a deal, I think that actually could influence the way that Hispanics actually view the Republican Party. But I mean, regardless if it's a path to legalization or a path to citizenship, I think most Americans just want to see these kids not get deported because we feel like it would be sort of an unfair punishment for these kids. But at the same time, we recognize that they're productive members of society. They need to pay taxes, and most of them have already adopted American culture and speak English. I think that those are really the important parts to Americans, that they just want to feel that they're involved in society.
All right. Well, you get the last word there, Alexandra Smith. Everybody, Alex, tell everybody how they can find you on social media.
So you can find me at Alexandra C. Smith. As you can imagine, there are a lot of Alex Smiths in the world. So, that's how you have to find me. And you can visit our website, americarisingpac.org. We are always putting up new blog posts exposing Democratic hypocrisy and holding them accountable.
Very good. I love it. Alex, thanks for being on the show today. We'll have you back.
Thank you so much for having me. Anytime.